The air in the obsidian ballroom was thick with the scent of aged whiskey and thinly veiled ambition. It was a world built on ancient power and modern money, where the human elite mingled with those far older, though few knew which was which. Julian Vane, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, stood near a Corinthian column, observing the crowd. He was here for one reason: to secure a crucial partnership for his family's shipping empire, a task that required sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. He had both. His attention, however, snagged on a figure across the room, a woman who seemed to pull the light from the already dim space. She was a study in monochromatic drama, a gown of black velvet and ivory silk that molded to a figure of impossible grace. Her hair, the shade of a raven's wing, cascaded around a pale face of breathtaking, almost painful beauty. But it was not just her beauty that held him, it was the contradiction she presented. Around her throat she wore a striking, almost heavy, silver chain. It was an odd piece, not delicate jewelry, but a series of interlocking antique links that settled high against her collarbones. It drew the eye precisely where a less confident woman might wear a necklace to distract. Julian, a man who dealt in secrets and surfaces, felt a prickle of professional curiosity. The chain was beautiful, yet it looked restrictive, almost like a subtle form of bondage, though she wore it with the poise of a queen wearing a crown. She was introduced to him eventually by their mutual host, a nervous, sweating man named Mr. Finch who seemed desperate to be rid of the responsibility. "Julian Vane, allow me to present the esteemed Lady Seraphina," Finch stammered, his eyes darting. Lady Seraphina. The name felt like something whispered from a crumbling cathedral. Her voice was a low, resonant melody that seemed to bypass his ears and settle directly in the center of his chest. "Mr. Vane. It is a pleasure." Her lips curved into a smile that was warm and engaging, yet somehow did not quite reach her eyes. Those eyes were the most unusual shade of deep, arterial red, an intensity Julian had never encountered before, a color he mentally dismissed as a trick of the lighting and the dramatic makeup. They spoke for an hour, discussing art, the volatility of the global markets, and the ancient history of the city they stood in. Julian found her conversation intoxicating. She was witty, knowledgeable, and possessed an old-world charm that made every word feel significant. He lost himself in the dance of the dialogue, almost forgetting his primary purpose for being there. But then the incident happened. A clumsy waiter, too rushed and too intimidated by the sheer wealth in the room, stumbled directly into Julian. A glass of deep red wine, a vintage Seraphina had just praised, flew from the tray. Julian reacted with a practiced speed, his hand shooting up to deflect the worst of the spill, but a few drops, dark and staining, landed on Lady Seraphina's pristine white silk bodice. A sound, a sharp, almost inaudible gasp, escaped her. Julian watched, aghast, as the easy, practiced smile on her face fractured. Her perfect composure evaporated in a single, terrifying second. Her red eyes widened, not in anger at the stain, but with a raw, primal hunger that made the hairs on Julian's neck stand on end. She moved swiftly, too swiftly for a human. Her hand, long-fingered and cold, shot up not to wipe the stain, but to grasp the silver chain at her neck. And as she instinctively tilted her head to control that sudden, overwhelming impulse, the chain, which had been resting firmly against her skin, momentarily shifted. It was a flicker, less than a heartbeat, but Julian Vane saw everything. He saw the wine-dark stain that wasn't the focal point of her panic. He saw the way her jaw flexed, the muscles working under the flawless skin. And beneath the slight upward movement of the chain, he saw the blinding white flash of a tooth, elongated and sharp, retracting with a speed that defied physics. It was a brief, impossible glimpse of something monstrous beneath the magnificent facade. The silver chain, he realized in that paralyzing moment, was not jewelry. It was a muzzle. A control. She hadn't been hiding a blemish, she had been concealing a predator. She recovered instantly, a forced, charming laugh bubbling up as she used a linen napkin to blot the stain. "Oh dear. My own fault for wearing white to an obsidian gathering. Please, Mr. Vane, do not trouble yourself over this poor waiter." The words were correct, the tone was light, but Julian's mind was reeling. He had just witnessed the impossible, the myth made flesh. Lady Seraphina was not human. Of course, Lady Seraphina, Julian managed, his voice steady despite the adrenaline-fueled terror gripping him. He was a master of masks, and his face remained a blank slate. "I owe you 1,000 apologies. I should perhaps seek out a proper cleaning solution for you." He was giving himself an exit, a chance to breathe and process the terrifying knowledge he now possessed. "That is very kind of you, but quite unnecessary. I believe a trip to my own residence will suffice." She gave him that cool, practiced smile again, but her red eyes, he noticed, were now fixed on him with a dangerous, new calculation. She knew he had seen something. He could practically feel the silent, lethal question hanging in the air between them. How much did you see, Mr. Vane? And what will you do with it? Julian Vane was a pragmatist, not a fool. He knew that acknowledging what he saw was a death sentence. To her, he was just a human, a brief acquaintance. He had to play the part of the oblivious gentleman. Then I shall bid you good evening, Lady Seraphina. It has been enlightening. Indeed, she purred, the melody in her voice regaining its dangerous quality. I suspect we will be speaking again very soon, Mr. Vane. He watched her turn and glide away, the silver chain catching the dim ballroom light. He didn't follow her path with his eyes, instead turning to the nearest exit and walking, not running, out of the obsidian ballroom. Julian Vane had come seeking a business deal. He left with a terrifying, world-shattering secret and the sudden, chilling realization that his life, and the comfortable, safe reality he knew, had just been torn wide open by a woman who wore silver to hide her fangs. He was a moth to a flame, and the flame was Saraphina. He knew he should run, vanish, never look back. But the exhilarating, terrifying knowledge he carried, I saw everything, kept him rooted to the spot, already planning his next move, a move that would either make him her prey or her unexpected partner in the darkness. He had to know more about the chain, about the need for control, and about the creature beneath the silk. The chill of the night air was a welcome shock after the suffocating warmth of the ballroom. Julian didn't hail a cab. He needed to walk, to let the adrenaline dissipate enough for his formidable mind to start working again. He was no longer thinking about shipping contracts or quarterly earnings. He was thinking about flesh, silver, and fangs. He reached his downtown penthouse, a fortress of steel and glass, and poured himself a triple scotch, neat. The amber liquid did little to warm the icy realization that had settled in his bones. He had peeked behind the veil of the world, and now the things that lurked there knew he had seen them. Julian wasn't a man who believed in fairy tales. He was a man of evidence, of balance sheets, of things that could be quantified. Yet, what he had seen defied every law of biology and physics he knew. A tooth that extended and retracted in a fraction of a second, an animalistic hunger that was momentarily unleashed by a drop of red wine, and a silver chain worn not as decoration but as a tether to humanity. He looked up at the panoramic view of the city. He owned this skyline, yet tonight he felt utterly exposed. Lady Seraphina, he murmured the name into the empty room. He needed to know her. Not for a deal but for survival. His options were brutally simple. Run and pray she never found him, or understand her and find a way to make his knowledge an asset, not a liability. Julian Vane had never run from a predator. He preferred to become one. His first action was to summon Marcus, his chief of security and his oldest friend. Marcus arrived within the hour, a towering man whose quiet demeanor hid a history of combat experience and unshakable loyalty. I need a name, Marcus. Lady Seraphina. Find everything. Bank accounts, property deeds, birth certificates, family history. Every scrap of digital and physical existence. Marcus, accustomed to Julian's intense demands, raised an eyebrow at the unusual fervor. The woman from the obsidian ball? She's an international figure, Julian. Private. Very private. Then dig deeper. Skip the usual channels. I need the unusual history, the whispers, the things that aren't on Wikipedia. Focus specifically on silver in her property records or any strange compulsions. Julian's voice was low, edged with urgency. Silver, boss? Like jewelry? Like chaining herself to existence, Julian corrected, a grim note in his voice. He couldn't tell Marcus the truth, not yet. The less his friend knew, the safer he was. Over the next 48 hours, the profile on Lady Seraphina was built. It was a file filled with contradictions. She owned properties dating back centuries, registered under different, yet phonetically similar, names across Europe. Her wealth was vast and untraceable, a dizzying accumulation of old money that seemed to defy the limits of a human lifetime. Most unsettling were the gaps. Periods of decades where she simply did not exist in any documented record, only to reappear in a new city, flawlessly integrated, perfectly poised, and eternally young. Julian found a mention of a peculiar clause in the deeds for 3 of her residences, a requirement for unbroken silver lining in the master suites, a detail that baffled the estate agents. The only other recurring element was her age, consistently listed as undetermined or simply ancient in private security reports that Julian managed to bribe his way into. The night after receiving the file, Julian didn't sleep. He sat in his library, surrounded by leather-bound books, and stared at a picture of Saraphina from a charity gala. Radiant, inhumanly beautiful, the silver chain gleaming under the flashbulbs. He understood the legend now. The stories of creatures that needed to be contained, creatures of immense power that were vulnerable to one specific element. She was a vampire. A real one. Not the silly romanticized versions, but a creature of deep, ancient night, using the chain as a physical and psychological restraint against her own nature. He was interrupted by the chime of his intercom. Marcus, his face unusually pale, was on the screen. "Julian, she's here. Lady Seraphina. She's in the lobby. She asked for you by name." Julian felt a cold wave of exhilaration and terror. He didn't hesitate. He knew the running was over. The predator had come to him. "Let her up, Marcus. And ensure the elevators have no surveillance feed active for the next hour. I want this meeting to be private." He quickly replaced the triple scotch with a glass of tap water, straightened his tie, and wiped the exhaustion from his face. When the elevator doors whispered open, Julian Vane was standing in the center of the room, every inch the composed, calculating CO. Lady Seraphina stepped out, moving with that familiar, unnerving grace. She wore a different, equally elegant black suit, but the silver chain was still there, a constant, gleaming promise of danger. "Mr. Vane," she said, her red eyes locking onto his. The smile she offered this time was sharper, less practiced, and far more dangerous. "I trust you weren't too troubled by our meeting the other night." "Lady Seraphina," Julian returned, his voice smooth and neutral. "Not at all. I was simply hoping for an opportunity to finish our discussion on volatility in the global markets." She took 2 steps into the room, stopping close enough that Julian could catch the faint, exotic perfume, and something else, something metallic and cold. "Mr. Vane, let us dispense with the markets. You are a man who appreciates directness, as do I. A simple spill of wine would not have sent a man of your stature running for the door quite so quickly. You were frightened, Julian. And you saw something." The use of his first name was a deliberate intimacy, a verbal leash. Julian knew this was the moment of truth. He couldn't lie, not to a creature whose existence spanned centuries. He could only reframe the truth. He didn't flinch. He walked to the window, turned his back to her, a calculated risk of supreme confidence, and stared out at the city lights. "I saw hunger, Seraphina," he said, his voice low and steady. "I saw a lapse in control, a moment of raw, unadulterated need. And I saw a piece of metal, an antique chain, struggling to contain something immense. Most people would call it a creature. I call it a liability." He turned back to face her. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of cold astonishment and dawning respect. She had expected terror, denial, or a clumsy attempt at blackmail. She had not expected analysis. "You are not afraid," she observed, her voice barely a whisper. "Fear is counterproductive, Seraphina. I saw you and I understood what that silver chain signifies. It means you are a creature with immense power but also immense vulnerability. That chain means there are rules. And if there are rules, there is a system I can leverage." She walked toward him, her movements silent, predator closing on prey. She stopped just inches away, her breath, cold and scentless, ghosting over his skin. Julian held his ground, his heart beating a frantic rhythm that only he could hear. "Tell me, Julian Vane, what do you believe you saw?" she challenged, her red eyes burning into his soul. Julian looked past her perfect, curved lips to the teeth hidden within. "I saw a woman bound by a relic. I saw a creature of darkness trying to walk in the sunlight. You wear the silver chain not just to hide your fangs, but to tame the monster you are. That stain of red wine, it was the scent of blood, wasn't it? It broke your control." Her eyes narrowed, the crimson deepening. The mask of composure was dangerously thin now. "And what do you want, little mouse, for this precious secret?" she hissed. Julian finally smiled, a cold, predatory expression that matched the danger in the room. This was the moment he switched the dynamic. He was no longer the prey. "I don't want money, Seraphina. And I don't want to run. I want knowledge. I want to understand the world you live in, the true hidden world." And most of all, he leaned in, meeting her gaze, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I want to know why you need that chain so badly. I want to know the price of your control. I propose a partnership." He paused, letting the word hang in the charged silence. "You give me the truth, the access, and the power that comes with it. And in return, I become your shield. I am a master of the human world, of finance, of logistics, of information. I can keep your secrets buried deeper than you can imagine. I can manage the vulnerabilities that even that silver chain cannot protect you from. I can be the man who saw everything and chose to protect it." Seraphina did not move for a long, agonizing moment. Her eyes searched his, looking for the lie, the weakness, the flaw that would allow her to simply end him. but she found only sharp, unyielding ambition. A human who understood power in a language she respected. A man who was offering a leash to a vampire. A slow, terrifying smile finally stretched across her lips, revealing the perfectly human teeth, the fangs still concealed, but the threat was very real. A partnership, she purred. A mortal and a predator. You are either the bravest man I have met in 2 centuries, Julian Vane, or the most foolish. Time will tell, Julian replied, his own adrenaline spiking at the success of his gamble. Do we have an agreement, Lady Seraphina? She tilted her head, the silver chain shifting on her skin with the movement. It was a moment of decision. Very well, Julian Vane. The game changes. You have chosen to step into the shadow. But understand this, a partnership with me is not a contract. It is an oath of blood. She extended her hand. Julian took it. Her skin was icy cold, her grip surprisingly delicate, yet absolute. The deal was struck, not in a ballroom but in the tense silence of a penthouse, sealing Julian's fate to the woman who wore a silver chain to hide her fangs. He was now irrevocably bound to her dark, ancient world. Julian's hand still felt the residual cold from Seraphina's touch long after the elevator doors had closed, taking her away. The oath of blood hung in the air, a chilling promise of a life irrevocably changed. His initial terror had been replaced by a fierce, driving curiosity. He was standing at the edge of a precipice, and the fall was going to be exhilarating. The following night, Saraphina summoned him. Not with a phone call, but with a silent, sleek black vehicle that appeared precisely at the stroke of midnight. The driver was a gaunt man in heavy shadow, silent and unervingly efficient. Julian stepped into the car, his security instincts screaming at the sheer reckless danger of it all, but his ambition overruled them. The car didn't take him to any of her known residences. It drove through the city's heart, past the glittering towers of his own domain, and plunged into the forgotten industrial districts, finally stopping before an abandoned, soot-stained warehouse. She awaits you inside, Mr. Vane, the driver rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves crunching. Julian walked into the massive, echoing darkness. It was cold, damp, and smelled of dust and something metallic, like old blood. The only light came from a single source far at the back, a cluster of tall, burning antique candles that cast long, dramatic shadows. In that small pool of light, Saraphina stood, completely transformed. She was no longer wearing the elegant silk of the elite. Tonight, she was dressed in a dark, flowing garment, simple and ancient in its cut. But the most striking difference was the silver chain. It was still around her neck, but tonight it was not hidden. It was prominently displayed, and Julian could see that it was not merely decorative. It was thick, heavy, and appeared to be etched with symbols that looked less like ornamentation and more like runes of power. Saraphina was pacing slowly, her winged shadow dancing on the concrete walls. She looked less like a noble woman and more like a caged entity. "Welcome to my sanctuary, Julian," she said, her voice softer here, yet laced with an undercurrent of pain. "A place where the veneer of human civility is irrelevant." "This is not a sanctuary, Saraphina," Julian observed, his eyes scanning the empty space. "This is a prison. And that chain is the lock." Saraphina stopped pacing, her crimson eyes fixing on him. A flicker of something that looked dangerously close to respect crossed her face. "You are direct. Good. Most mortals would fumble with pleasantries." "Yes, Julian. You saw my moment of weakness. The chain is what keeps the beast leashed." She reached up and touched the cool silver. "But it does more than hide my fangs. It burns." Julian felt a sharp intake of breath. "It hurts you?" "It does not merely hurt, Julian. It contains. We, Julian, are creatures of immense, chaotic energy. We are fueled by the essence of life. Without restraint, the hunger is perpetual, uncontrollable. The moment I smelled that wine, a scent so close to the real thing, the monster surged. That chain is forged from pure, ritualistically purified silver. It is the only element that can dampen our vitality, our connection to the source. It is a constant, agonizing weight. A reminder of what I am and what I must not become." She explained that the runes weren't random designs. They were binding enchantments hammered into the silver centuries ago by a powerful order of mystics who had once hunted her kind. The chain was essentially a portable shackle, forcing her ancient spirit into a state of perpetual, numbing pain, keeping her stable enough to move among the unsuspecting human world. "The longer I wear it, the weaker I become, Julian. But the moment I take it off..." She let the thought hang, a delicious threat in the cold air. Julian, ever the pragmatist, immediately saw the flaw. "But if it weakens you, why not switch it for another material? A silver alloy, perhaps?" Seraphina let out a soundless, dry laugh. You think like a broker, Julian. We are not dealing with chemistry. We are dealing with curse and spirit. The silver must be pure, and the binding runes must be unbroken. Any compromise in the metal's purity, and the energy surges through the weak point, burning the skin, causing uncontrolled transformation. The chains must be heavy, solid, and always against the skin to suppress the urge to feed. Julian took a step closer, captivated. This was the truth he'd bargained for. A world of hidden magic, ancient curses, and a lethal woman in constant, controlled agony. You came to me for a partnership, Julian, she continued, her red eyes gleaming in the candlelight. You are my anchor in this world and I am your key to the real one. But our partnership has a cost and it begins now. The cost of my control. She told him about the rights of the chain, the monthly period when the silver's power waned, coinciding with a specific lunar cycle. During this time, the hunger became almost unbearable, and the chain offered only minimal defense. The elders who forged these relics created a failsafe, she said. A period when we must be contained or risk unleashing mass destruction. Tonight is the start of that cycle. I need a watcher, Julian. Someone whose presence is a living, breathing distraction. Someone who can keep my focus tethered to the human world. A mind I respect enough to keep my own from shattering. Julian realized the terrifying magnitude of his agreement. He wasn't just her consultant, he was her human restraint. His very existence was meant to be the focus that kept her from succumbing to the bloodlust. And what happens if I fail to be a sufficient distraction? Julian asked, his voice firm, though his heart was pounding. Seraphina walked slowly toward him until the tip of the heavy silver chain nearly brushed his thigh. Her face was inches from his, her eyes glittering. If you fail, Julian Vane, the chain will be removed, either by my own frenzied hands or by the sheer force of the power it holds back. And the first thing that power will demand is the life essence of the one closest to me. Your life essence. She tilted her head again, and this time, Julian saw the faint, shimmering reflection of the candlelight on the silver runes near her jugular. The beauty was a terrifying mask for the monster just beneath the surface. Your task for the next 3 nights is to stay with me, Julian. Talk to me. Argue with me. Be human. Be alive. And do not, under any circumstances, allow your fear to show. Fear tastes bitter, and I prefer my distractions sweet. Julian looked at her, the creature of eternal night, bound by the very element that could kill her, a silver chain that was both a weapon and a self-inflicted wound. He was trapped in a cold, echoing warehouse with a bloodthirsty vampire, and his survival depended on the sheer force of his will and the sharpness of his mind. Understood, Lady Seraphina, Julian said, taking the final, terrifying leap of faith. Let us discuss the global shipping contracts. I find that the volatility of the Baltic Dry Index is a truly excellent distraction. He was staking his life on the belief that her ambition and intellect were stronger than her ancient hunger. He had committed to a 3-day vigil, a trial by fire, or rather, by fang. The first night in the warehouse was an endless, tense loop of conversation. Julian, driven by the knowledge that his life depended on his ability to keep her attention anchored, spoke relentlessly. He spoke of the meticulous planning involved in navigating global sanctions, the subtle betrayals inherent in high finance, and the intoxicating rush of seizing control from chaos. Seraphina listened, but with an agonizing, visible effort. She sat on a simple stone bench, her posture rigid. The thick silver chain dug into her pale skin, and Julian could see where the edges of the etched runes were already beginning to leave raw, red indentations. Every few minutes, a flicker of raw, predatory exhaustion would cross her face, a physical manifestation of the silver slowly sapping her strength. You speak of control, Julian, she finally interrupted, her voice strained, a melody cracked by pain. But you only grasp at monetary control. Control over ephemeral assets. Do you understand the sheer, agonizing self-control required to choose agony over euphoria, to choose the burn of silver over the exquisite release of blood? Julian leaned against a steel pillar, meeting her intense gaze. I understand the need for leverage, Seraphina. You have chosen the chain because the alternative, uncontrolled hunger, would destroy the life you've built. The human facade, the wealth, the power, it all rests on the weight of that silver. It is your weakness, but it is also your masterpiece of self-preservation. He knew he was pushing her, provoking her, forcing her to intellectualize her suffering. It was a dangerous tactic, but her reaction, a tightening around her mouth, a dangerous flash in her eyes, told him it was working. He was engaging the mind behind the fangs. Masterpiece, she scoffed. It is a curse. A punishment for existing. Do you know what it costs to maintain this pretense, Julian? Do you know what it feels like to live for centuries, watching everything you value crumble to dust? The humans you grew fond of, the empires you briefly helped build, the lovers, all reduced to a handful of ash, while you remain unaltered, forced to start over and over. Julian saw a fissure in her eternal shell. This was the deep, existential loneliness that a mortal lifetime couldn't comprehend. And yet you continue, Julian pointed out. What? Why not simply retreat into the shadows, forgo the human world entirely, and live as a feral beast? Seraphina looked down at the chain, her fingers tracing the cruel lines of the runes. Because, Julian, the beast is not the worst part of me. The worst part is the memory. The knowledge of what I sacrificed. I was not born with this curse. I was given it. And the power was too intoxicating, too vast to refuse. But the price was the silver cage. She looked up at him, her red eyes filled with an ancient, dark regret. I am Seraphina. Before the chain, before the thirst, I was a woman of ambition, a scholar who sought forbidden knowledge. The power I sought promised to elevate me beyond mortal constraints. It succeeded. But it delivered me into the hands of those who feared that power and bound me with this relic, not to kill me but to force a penance. The second night was worse. Seraphina's composure was breaking. The moonlight, though filtered by the warehouse roof, seemed to agitate the primal energy within her. She was restless, moving with jerky, unnatural speed. The scent of blood, even Julian's normal healthy human scent, seemed to be amplified for her. Talk, Julian, she commanded, her voice ragged. Speak of pain. Speak of loss. Anything that can sever my mind from the pulse in your veins. Julian, though terrified, used the moment to press his advantage, moving from business to her personal history. Tell me about the mystics. The ones who forged the silver. Where are they now? How can an organization capable of creating such a powerful relic simply vanish? Seraphina laughed, a harsh, dry sound. They didn't vanish, Julian. They died. They exhausted their lives and their essence to create not just my chain but many. They were a sect known as the Carthan Priors, a group obsessed with balance. They believed that for every great darkness unleashed, there must be a commensurate restraint. But their magic was fueled by life, and the weight of binding creatures like me eventually consumed them entirely. They succeeded in creating the chains, but they failed to pass on the knowledge of how to break them. He saw the subtle strategy in her words. She was giving him information that he could use, a shared vulnerability. She was tempting him with the promise of more power if he helped her. So you are trapped, Julian deduced. Bound by the dying curse of men who no longer exist. You need that knowledge, Seraphina. The way to break the chains. And you believe I can find it in the forgotten corners of the human world. The world of dusty archives, corrupt officials, and untraceable records. Your world, she confirmed. The information must exist somewhere, Julian. The Carthagins left clues, riddles, trials. I have sought them for centuries, but my methods are too blunt, too overt. I leave a trail of disturbed lives. You are a ghost in the global network. You can find what I cannot. As the hours bled into the terrifying early morning, Julian realized the true weight of her existence. She wasn't just a monster, she was a slave to a divine curse. The silver chain was the physical manifestation of her inescapable destiny. She suddenly stood up, moving away from him to the darkest corner of the warehouse, her back turned. Julian could hear a low, guttural sound escaping her lips, a sound of pure, unbridled agony. The urge is too strong, Julian. I cannot look at you, she ground out. The sight of your heart beating is too loud. Tell me about the first time you were truly betrayed. Tell me about a pain that is not physical, Julian. Anchor me in the petty, beautiful suffering of humanity. Julian swallowed hard, his own fear now a dull, persistent ache. He began to speak not of finance but of his own dark history, a story of a childhood friend who stole a secret, a business partner who nearly ruined his family, a moment of profound, cold abandonment. He stripped away his own veneer of control, giving her a piece of his human vulnerability, an offering of shared, non-fatal pain. He spoke for an hour, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. Seraphina remained in the shadows, silent, listening. When the first faint hint of a false dawn began to touch the high windows of the warehouse, the tension finally began to recede. Seraphina emerged from the shadows, her face still pale and drawn, but the wildness in her eyes had receded, replaced by a deep, terrifying calm. The silver chain was covered in a faint sheen of moisture, either her sweat or something more magical, and the indentations on her neck were more pronounced. You survived the first night, Julian Vane, she whispered. You are more than a distraction. You are a conduit. You understand the mechanics of power, even mine. Julian was exhausted, mentally drained, but he had won the first round. He had kept his life by exposing his soul. I am your anchor, Seraphina. And you are my truth, Julian countered, matching her intensity. Now tell me, what is the first step in finding the Carthan Protocol? Where do we start looking for the knowledge to break the chains? Julian returned to his penthouse and immediately shed the exhaustion of the 3-day vigil. He was fundamentally changed. The world had shifted from a financial playground to a shadow war zone. He no longer saw a city, he saw a layer cake of reality, and he was now operating in the darkest, most dangerous layer. Seraphina had given him the first clue, a piece of information she'd spent centuries trying to decipher using brute force supernatural methods. Julian, on the other hand, approached it like a problem of network analysis and data retrieval. The clue was a single cryptic phrase found etched onto a forgotten piece of parchment in a hidden alcove of her warehouse. The keeper of the scales remembers the first betrayal, where the sun's architect built his own doom. To Seraphina, it was mystic poetry. To Julian it was a search query. He summoned Marcus, his loyal security chief, who was still blissfully unaware of the vampire client. Julian gave him a cover story of a highly sensitive historical acquisition for a wealthy, eccentric European collector. Marcus, I need you to find an organization, ancient, dissolved, obsessed with balance, that used the symbol of the scales, Julian instructed, leaning over his vast antique desk. Then, find a link between that organization and any major historical figure known as an architect, who was involved in sun worship or solar symbolism. Marcus was used to the esoteric demands of the ultra-rich. Within 24 hours he returned with a detailed report. The scales pointed almost immediately to the Carthan priors. Their symbol, used in secret carvings and seals, was indeed a set of perfectly balanced scales, representing the balance of light and shadow. The sun's architect was more complex, leading Julian's research deep into Renaissance Italy. It led him to a forgotten contemporary of Leonardo da Vinci, a brilliant but disgraced cartographer and engineer named Valerius Sol, whose nickname in court had been the Sungazer due to his obsession with celestial mechanics. Sol was known to have been a patron of an obscure monastic order, the very one that housed the Carthan priors just before their dissolution. Valerius Sol was exiled after a disastrous incident involving a prototype solar mirror, Julian, Marcus explained. They say the mirror burned down half a palace and blinded the duke. The official records were scrubbed, but the whispers claim he was conducting forbidden experiments. Julian's blood ran cold. Forbidden experiments. The same pursuit that had led the scholar Seraphina to her eternal curse. Valerius Sol hadn't just been an architect. He had been the human catalyst for the prior's most powerful binding ritual, the creation of the silver chain. Julian had found the link. Valerius Sol's exile was the first betrayal. The paper trail led to Sol's final, secret project. A small, isolated tower retreat in the rugged coastal mountains of Sicily, where he supposedly spent his last years working on a perfect celestial map. Julian presented his findings to Seraphina that same night, not in the dusty warehouse, but in a neutral, soundproofed room in a derelict historical building Julian owned. She arrived with the silver chain looking heavier than ever, her face reflecting the constant drain. Valerius Sol, she murmured, the name tasting foreign on her ancient tongue. I pursued the name for decades, Julian, but always hit a wall of fire and exile. You found the connection in less than 3 days. I asked the digital world, not the shadows, Seraphina. He didn't just build a map, he was involved in creating the protocol. His final location must contain a key, perhaps the master runes or a chart of the binding cycle. Julian's mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating logistics. We need to go to Sicily. Now. Seraphina looked at Julian with an expression that was part admiration, part lethal concern. You rush toward danger with an enthusiasm I have not seen in a mortal since the Roman legions, she noted. But you are correct. If Sol was the architect of the doom, his tower is where the first fragment of the Carthan Protocol will be found. This is no longer a conversation, Julian. It is a journey. And you cannot travel alone. The hidden world recognizes me, but it will destroy you if you step into its territory unguarded. I am your partner, Seraphina. I will manage the logistics. I will arrange the private flights, the documents, the cover story, Julian insisted. He needed to maintain his sense of human control. The cover story will be easy, she said, her lips curving into a predatory smile that Julian was beginning to recognize. We will be lovers. The wealthy, enigmatic CO Julian Vane, whisking away his stunning, reclusive lover, Saraphina, to a secluded villa on the Sicilian coast. It is a persona that grants access and deflects curiosity. Julian swallowed the thought of this dangerous closeness, this forced intimacy, sending a fresh wave of adrenaline through him. He was about to pretend to be romantically involved with a vampire whose silver-shackled hunger he'd barely survived. And the chain, Seraphina? Julian asked, his eyes involuntarily drawn to the silver. It will raise questions. Seraphina reached up and touched the heavy metal. The wealthy are eccentric, Julian. It is an antique collar, a piece of unusual, expensive jewelry. A statement of power. No one who sees my face will dare ask twice. But beneath the surface, it will be your responsibility to ensure that no one gets close enough to see the exhaustion, or hear the constant, grinding agony it causes. You must be my constant shield. The next day Julian had everything in place. A private jet waited on the tarmac, a sprawling coastal villa was secured under a shell corporation, and 2 perfect high-net-worth cover identities were established. He looked at the details, feeling a thrill he hadn't known since his earliest, most cutthroat days in finance. He was exchanging a fortune in safety for a shot at impossible power. He met Seraphina at the airport. She was dressed in a pristine white trench coat and large, dark sunglasses that concealed the crimson of her eyes. The silver chain was a sharp contrast against the white, a stark, undeniable presence. As they walked across the tarmac, Seraphina slipped her arm through his, a gesture that felt less like intimacy and more like an enforcement of possession. "Remember our bargain, Julian," she whispered, her voice dangerously close to his ear. "You are not a bodyguard. You are my tether. Keep my mind on the map, on the goal. And never forget that the greatest hunger is not for blood, but for freedom from this silver." Julian squeezed her hand reassuringly, a purely human gesture that belied the terror he felt. He was walking hand in hand with his beautiful, chained doom, heading straight into the heart of an ancient secret. The hunt for the Carthan Protocol had begun. The coastal villa in Sicily was a sun-drenched marvel, all marble terraces and infinity pools overlooking the turquoise Ionian Sea. Julian had selected it for its opulence and, more importantly, its isolation. It was a place where their cover, the dazzling, reclusive couple, could flourish without the close scrutiny of the mainland elite. Seraphina, despite her inherent connection to the night, moved through the villa during the day with calculated grace. She wore vast, stylish hats and sheer garments that protected her from the sun, making her look like a goddess on a clandestine holiday. But the silver chain was an ever-present reminder of the deadly reality beneath the facade. Their fake relationship was a high-wire act. In front of the minimal villa staff, all heavily vetted and sworn to discretion by Julian's security team, they were effortlessly intimate. Julian held her hand, Seraphina leaned into his side. These physical touches were a subtle form of torture for Julian. He felt the unnatural cold of her skin, the rigid stillness of her muscles, and the vibration of the chain against his own touch, a silent warning. "Your hand is cold, darling," Seraphina would coo for the benefit of a passing maid, tightening her grip on Julian's arm. "I find the heat of the sun quite exhausting," Julian would reply smoothly, playing the part of the devoted, slightly strained lover. But behind closed doors the facade dropped, and the air crackled with a much more dangerous tension. Julian spent his days studying the archives of Valerius' soul, which he had quickly and illegally digitized and flown over. Seraphina was his translator and interpreter, guiding him through the archaic Latin and coded symbology. One evening, as the Mediterranean sunset cast long, blood-red shadows across the room, Julian found a breakthrough. It wasn't in Soul's astronomical charts, but in the margin of a personal letter. "The tower," Julian said, pointing to a minuscule, intricate sketch on the page. "Soul's retreat." He didn't call it a tower. He called it the Axis Mundi, the pillar connecting heaven and earth. Seraphina leaned over the desk, the silver chain clinking faintly as she moved. The proximity was overwhelming. Julian could see the faint arterial red capillaries in her eyes and smell the metallic undertone that was her natural scent. "The Axis Mundi," Seraphina repeated, the resonance of the name suggesting ancient power. The Carthan priors believed the chain must be activated where the human and cosmic energies were strongest. A binding point. Soul chose a geothermal location. Julian checked the coordinates. The tower wasn't far. It was perched atop an extinct volcano near the coast, hidden by dense growth and impossible terrain. The text here, it describes the tower as having eyes that weep to the stars and a heart that burns to the underworld. It sounds like he built a giant ritualistic device, not a retirement home. Julian looked at her. "I can arrange a climbing team, but the area is restricted and dangerous." Seraphina smiled, a dangerous, thrilling expression. We are not sending a climbing team, Julian. We are going. The protocol will be protected by ancient enchantments, not human security guards. A mortal team would be slaughtered, and their deaths would attract the wrong kind of attention. She reached across the desk, her fingers brushing Julian's cheek, a move that was part intimate lover, part calculating predator. This is the part of the partnership where the mortal leverages the immortal. You provide the map, Julian, and I will provide the entry. The following night, under the cover of a moonless sky, they began their ascent. Julian was dressed in rugged climbing gear, Seraphina in dark, flexible garments that still allowed the silver chain to gleam faintly in the darkness. The climb was grueling even for Julian, a man of exceptional physical discipline. For Seraphina it seemed effortless. She moved through the darkness with impossible grace, her strength undiminished despite the constant agonizing drain of the silver. Yet he noticed one critical detail. When she had to grip a sheer rock face, she would often favor her left hand, which was farther from the silver chain on her neck. Her suppressed vitality was still a factor. Finally they reached the summit, a ruined, circular stone structure half swallowed by the earth. The tower was not tall but wide, clearly built for a ritual purpose. In the center, a jagged, naturally occurring geothermal fissure released a faint plume of sulfurous steam, the heart that burns to the underworld. But what truly chilled Julian was the presence of a second, much fainter energy. He was human, but standing next to Seraphina in a place of such concentrated power, he could feel a low-frequency hum, an oppressive sense of wrongness in the air. "The protection is strong," Seraphina whispered, her voice tight. The silver chain seemed to be vibrating, the etched runes glowing faintly with trapped energy. The priors did not want anyone, mortal or immortal, to access this knowledge. They found the eyes, four oddly shaped, silver-plated apertures high on the ruins' walls, angled toward the zenith. They were closed, locked by some ancient, mechanical system. Julian approached the first one, analyzing the locking mechanism. It's a complex gearing system, Renaissance-era design. It requires immense, precise torque to move these plates simultaneously. It's impossible for one man. Seraphina didn't move. She stood near the steaming fissure, the energy from the earth and the sky battling the suppressive power of the chain. Julian watched, horrified, as a tiny thread of dark, shimmering energy began to leak from her body and condense around the silver links. The chain was fighting to hold. The priors designed the protocol to be accessed only by the chained, Julian, Seraphina breathed, her eyes blazing red. The lock is not mechanical. It is metaphysical. It requires the dampened, concentrated power of a vampire to activate. The silver is the key. Julian understood. Valerius Sol, the sun's architect, had designed the lock so that the creature bound by the chain would have to endure the pain of using the silver itself as a conduit of power to open the door to its own freedom. It was a vicious, self-punishing design. Seraphina turned to him, the predatory mask momentarily gone, replaced by an expression of pure, exquisite pain. "I must touch the silver-plated aperture, Julian. But the moment my essence connects, the chain will try to purify the power, and the pain will be unbearable. I will lose focus. I will lose control." She walked toward the first silver eye, her movements strained. "This is your true task, Julian Vane. You must be the anchor. When the pain hits, I will fight the chain, the protocol, and the beast within. You must keep me tethered. Speak to me. Demand my attention. Keep my mind from sinking into the madness of the primal hunger. If I break, the chain comes off and you die." She placed her fingertips on the cold, ancient silver of the aperture. A blinding flash of purple light erupted, and a raw, silent scream tore from Seraphina's throat. The thick silver chain on her neck glowed an agonizing, incandescent white. Julian saw the silver fangs flash out, momentarily exposed before being violently forced back by the searing heat of the chain. He had to act now. The BDI Seraphina. Julian shouted, gripping her arm, grounding her in the present, the human world. "Tell me the closing numbers for the Baltic Dry Index yesterday. The shipping lanes are in chaos, Seraphina. Focus." Julian's voice was the only thing standing between Seraphina and her self-destruction. The air was electric, thick with the smell of ozone and sulfur from the geothermal fissure, compounded by the metallic stench of power struggling against its own restraint. The silver chain on Seraphina's throat was incandescent, burning white-hot as it desperately fought to suppress the massive surge of energy she was channeling into the ancient silver aperture. Her muscles were locked in a spasm of excruciating pain. Her hands, fused to the silver lock, were trembling violently. The fangs Julian saw were no longer retracting fully. They were visible now, slivers of blinding white against her drawn lips, a raw, terrifying testament to the silver's failing grip. 702. Julian roared, stepping closer despite the danger, forcing her to hear the specific details of his human world. The freight volume in the South China Sea. Focus on the number, Seraphina. It is pure numerical human control. He was shouting arbitrary data, anything to give her conscious mind something tangible to grip. Her red eyes, wide and unfocused, slowly swiveled toward his. Julian was no longer her partner. He was her lifeline, a necessary torment. A low, vibrating growl escaped her throat, a sound utterly devoid of humanity. Burns Julian. The essence, it is devouring the life in the silver. It demands release. The release is death, Seraphina. And I don't deal in failure. Julian grabbed her shoulder, his touch a desperate plea for her sanity. He felt the intense cold of her skin, a sign that the silver was drawing her own life energy to neutralize the raw power. You want freedom from the chain? Then control the burn. Don't let the priors win from the grave. You are Seraphina. A scholar, a queen, a survivor of 2 millennia. Open the lock. His words, a mix of desperate logic and powerful validation, finally pierced the haze of her agony. With a raw, visceral effort that seemed to tear at the very fabric of her being, Seraphina pulled back the surging power. A final, blinding flash of purple light erupted from the aperture, followed by a loud, mechanical clunk. The silver chain instantly reverted to its dull, heavy state, though it left behind a faint, sickening odor of scorched metal. Seraphina stumbled back, her body shaking violently, the strength drawn out of her like blood from a wound. Julian caught her, supporting her dead weight against the cold stone of the tower. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The fangs slowly, agonizingly retracted. For the first time, Seraphina looked truly mortal, utterly spent, fragile and bound. The eyes, she choked out, pointing with a trembling hand. Julian turned. The silver aperture had retracted, revealing a small, dark opening in the wall. The same powerful purple light, now contained, emanated from within. He helped Seraphina to a safer spot before approaching the opening. He reached inside and pulled out not a map, but a single heavy object. A cube of obsidian, polished to a mirror sheen, perfectly sized to fit the palm of his hand. It radiated the same unsettling low-frequency hum he had felt earlier. It's a black stone, Julian observed, turning it over. It felt impossibly heavy, colder than the night air. Seraphina, leaning against the wall, recovered just enough to focus her gaze on the object. The priors despised paper, Julian. Too fragile. That is a memory stone. The first protocol is not a map, it is knowledge. She instructed Julian to place the cube against the silver chain on her neck. Julian hesitated. The chain had just nearly killed her. Are you certain, Seraphina? That obsidian is radiating the same power that nearly destroyed you. Do it. She commanded, the urgency back in her voice. The silver is the conduit. It is the only way for the knowledge to pass without shattering your human mind. I must absorb the protocol now before the tower's energy dissipates. Julian took a deep breath, his hands steadying. He pressed the cold, dense obsidian cube directly against the silver chain on her throat. The effect was instantaneous and far less violent than before, but equally terrifying. The silver chain absorbed the obsidian's light, and a faint, shimmering blue light began to travel along the runes, spreading from the chain and seeping into Seraphina's skin. Her eyes fluttered closed, and her face took on an expression of deep, almost ecstatic absorption. Julian watched, mesmerized, as an ancient, silent stream of information flowed from the stone, through the silver restraint, and into the vampire's eternal memory. After a minute, the obsidian cube dimmed, becoming inert. Julian pulled it away. Seraphina opened her eyes. They were not red now, but a deep, mesmerizing blue-violet, reflecting the energy she had just consumed. What did you see? Julian asked, his voice hushed. Seraphina rose slowly, her movements fluid again, though the exhaustion was still palpable. The silver chain no longer looked like a shackle, it looked like a data port she had just utilized. The first protocol, she murmured, her voice ringing with newfound clarity. It is not a key to break the chain, Julian. It is a timetable. A complex, millennia-spanning chart of the silver's maintenance cycle. The priors knew the silver would decay. The chains are not permanent. They must be replenished. Julian felt a fresh wave of cold dread. Replenished? With what? With life essence, Seraphina revealed, the blue-violet receding from her eyes, leaving the familiar, dangerous red. The silver suppressive power is fueled by the life force of mortals, extracted and ritually bound during specific celestial alignments. The protocol outlines 3 remaining sites where the Carthan priors stored their collected essence, 3 caches of vitality, to maintain the chains for the next age. We found the timetable, Julian. Now we must find the fuel. She took a step toward him, the intensity of her focus unsettling. The first cache is located in Verona. Hidden beneath the city of tragedy, where love is a myth and death is the only reality. The protocol gives us the date and the time of the next ritualistic search. We must be there before the power is claimed by those who would use it to reinforce the chains or worse, break their own. Julian knew instantly that the stakes had just been raised again. They weren't just seeking freedom. They were in a race against other chained entities, perhaps even more powerful and ruthless than Seraphina, who would be seeking the same fuel. Verona, Julian repeated, already calculating the logistics, the risk, the need for speed. I'll arrange the flight before dawn. And Seraphina, he looked directly at the thick silver on her throat. Does the protocol say anything about reducing the pain? Seraphina gave him a wry, dark smile. It says the pain is necessary. A perpetual reminder of the power contained. But the better fueled the silver, the less volatile the beast. Now, Julian Vane, the game is afoot. Prepare the escape. Our gilded lie in Sicily is over. The escape from Sicily was a blur of efficiency orchestrated by Julian. Within hours, his private jet was airborne, slicing through the midnight sky towards Verona. The journey was not a respite, it was a pressurized chamber of extreme tension. Julian and Seraphina were alone in the plush cabin, a space designed for human luxury, now repurposed for an immortal's desperate flight. The exhaustion Seraphina felt after using the silver chain as an energy conduit was profound. She lay across the leather seating, silent and still, the silver chain heavy against her pale throat. The glamour had faded, replaced by a terrifying fragility. Julian watched her, not with fear but with a clinical fascination. He realized her power was not inexhaustible, it was finite and came with a brutal, metabolic cost, constantly compounded by the silver. The protocol confirmed our vulnerability, Julian, Seraphina finally whispered, her eyes remaining closed. We are not the only ones seeking this knowledge. The priors created more than one chain. I am merely one of the oldest and most rigid examples of their art. You mean there are others like you? Other chained entities? Julian asked, leaning forward. Yes. And they are all facing the same urgent dilemma. The silver is failing. The rites of renewal are upon us. The protocol's timetable is not exclusive to me, it is a schedule of the caches. Anyone with a fragment of the prior's lore will know that the Verona cache is the first to search. And you expect competition? Seraphina opened her eyes and the crimson was dangerously intense. I expect war. Those who resist the chain's restraint, the ones who embrace the frenzy, will seek the cache to destroy it, to ensure that no one can replenish their bindings. And those who prefer a subtler form of control will try to steal the entire cache to bolster their own chains while letting ours decay. She sat up slowly, her movement radiating a cold, coiled energy. One in particular will be in Verona, she said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal purr. A creature I have crossed paths with before, centuries ago. Lord Cassian of the Carpathian line. Julian pulled up a discreet, secured tablet. Cassian. Any records? He leaves none, Seraphina stated dismissively. He moves like the wind, favoring chaos over order. Unlike me, he views the silver chain not as a penance but as a challenge. He acquired his chain in the 17th century and almost immediately corrupted its integrity, finding a way to mitigate the burn. He is immensely powerful, Julian, and entirely unpredictable. He has a particular fondness for tragedy. Julian felt a fresh wave of adrenaline. This was no longer an academic hunt, it was a confrontation. We need a better plan than simply rushing into Verona, Julian said, his mind already formulating strategies. The cache is hidden in the city of Romeo and Juliet, the city of fabricated romance. The protocol mentioned, where love is a myth and death is the only reality. Where does that lead us? Seraphina gave a faint, terrible smile. It leads us to the tomb, Julian. The Carthan priors chose sites that resonate with the paradox of the human condition. Verona's entire identity is a lie, a manufactured tragedy. The cache will be hidden deep beneath the place that represents the coldest core of that myth. She stood and walked to the narrow, polished mahogany bar in the jet, her eyes scanning the array of human spirits. She picked up a heavy, crystal Scotch glass, Julian's glass, and held it, watching the light refract. My control is thinning, Julian. The surge I performed in Sicily cost me dearly. You must be prepared. When we land, you will not simply be my partner, you will be my human shield and my eyes. Cassian will not look for a financial predator, he will look for the weakest point. She set the glass down. The cache must be beneath Juliet's tomb, the real tomb beneath the old Capuchin monastery. It is a place of perpetual mourning for a love that never existed. A perfect location for a cache of vitality. As the jet began its descent into Verona's quiet, pre-dawn airport, Seraphina's demeanor shifted. The exhaustion remained, but her focus sharpened, becoming a cold, unwavering weapon. "Listen to me, Julian," she commanded, gripping his arm with an unnatural strength that surprised him. The cold of her touch was immediate and absolute. Cassian does not respect the rules of the human world, but he is a master of its dark underbelly. He will have proxies, human servants, perhaps even other lesser-chained entities. You must look for abnormalities, unblinking eyes and obsessive devotion to their master, or any sign of a vampire's influence. Julian looked into her eyes, no longer seeing a mysterious noblewoman, but a creature of ancient power clinging to her sanity by a thread of silver. He realized the sheer burden he had taken on. He was the anchor, but he was also the bait. He reached out and gently traced the rough runes on her silver chain, a gesture of dark, desperate intimacy. "I see your vulnerability, Seraphina. And I see the urgency. I will get you to the cache. But when we find it, I need to know exactly how this essence is accessed. And what happens when you absorb it." Seraphina's lips curved into a slow, dangerous smile, one that promised both reward and ruin. "The ritual of renewal is ancient, Julian. It is an act of consumption and transfer. The essence must be administered through the one who holds the deepest conviction in the cause of the chained, the one who has proven his worth as an anchor." She paused, letting the implication sink in. "It will be your task, Julian. You will be the one who administers the very thing that sustains my existence. A mortal, giving life to the immortal." The plane touched down with a smooth, silent bump. The lights of Verona were just beginning to glimmer in the twilight. "We are exposed here," Julian stated, his financial mind taking over. "Cassian will track you through the energy signature of the silver. We need a distraction." "Then give him one, Julian," Seraphina challenged, her voice low. "Show him that Lady Seraphina is not alone. Show him her devoted mortal lover is in charge of her logistics. Make our gilded lie so bright, so overwhelming that his shadow cannot touch us." Julian smiled, a cold, predatory smile that was beginning to match her own. He was back in his element, high-stakes confrontation, leverage, and the meticulous execution of a perfect cover story. He adjusted his suit jacket, already planning the security detail and the fake reservation at the most visible hotel. As they stepped off the jet, Julian placed his arm around Seraphina's waist, pulling her close. The illusion of a powerful, glamorous couple was perfect, but beneath the surface, two shadows, Julian's human ambition and Seraphina's ancient hunger, were hurtling toward an inevitable, bloody confrontation beneath the streets of Verona. Lord Cassian's shadow was already waiting. Verona felt heavy with the irony of its own legend. Julian and Seraphina, the dazzling couple, had taken the most visible suite in the grandest hotel, using their fabricated wealth as a shield. Julian used this visibility to run his operations, creating a fortress of human logistics around Seraphina. He placed his best surveillance teams around the old Capuchin monastery, the rumored site of the true Juliet's tomb. The ritual of renewal was scheduled to begin in less than 48 hours, the peak of the celestial alignment that would charge the cache. The clock was ticking and Lord Cassian's presence was a near certainty. Seraphina, despite her visible exhaustion, spent the first day immersed in Julian's intelligence. She used the first protocol, the timeline of the caches, to predict Cassian's movements. Cassian is a showman, Julian. He won't simply sneak in. He will ensure his presence is felt. He will play on the human tragedy of the location, Seraphina analyzed, tracing a map of the monastery grounds. The silver chain was a constant, dull irritant, and Julian noted the slight tremor in her hands whenever she moved too quickly. Julian found the first sign of interference late that night. His surveillance detected an unusual, non-human anomaly, a sudden brief surge of cold, kinetic energy near the crypt entrance of the monastery, followed by a fleeting shadow. It was too fast for a human, too subtle for a vampire. "Cassian's proxy is here," Julian stated, pointing to the thermal images. "He's not a human servant. It's too quick, too cold." Seraphina's eyes narrowed. "A shade. A low-level entity, bound by Cassian through forced consumption. They possess kinetic speed but lack true power. They are scouts, nothing more. Cassian is testing our defenses, confirming the location." Julian had no time for subtlety. They had to act immediately before Cassian himself arrived. Under the cover of a massive, pre-scheduled delivery of expensive antiques for their hotel suite, Julian arranged a clean, temporary diversion of city patrols near the monastery. At 3 a.m., the darkest part of the night, Julian and Seraphina entered the neglected public crypt that housed the legendary, but fake, sarcophagus of Juliet. The air was immediately colder, thick with centuries of moisture and the oppressive energy of sorrow, a perfect human psychic residue for the Carthan prior storage site. The cache is not in the tomb, Julian. It is underneath the truth of the lie, Seraphina whispered, her voice tight. Julian had procured a commercial ground-penetrating radar disguised as a historical preservation tool. He quickly scanned the floor beneath the sarcophagus. The reading was immediate and startling. A deep, circular void beneath the foundation, lined with an unnatural density. There's a sealed chamber 20 feet down. Looks like granite and something else. Something that blocks the radar's full spectrum, Julian reported. Seraphina approached the sarcophagus, ignoring the cheesy tourist relics left by heartbroken visitors. She placed her fingertips on the cold marble, and Julian watched as the silver chain on her neck began to pulse faintly, almost inaudibly. The lock is triggered by life resonance, she said, her voice strained by the effort. A sacrifice of focus, a deep submission to the protocol's rules. She didn't hesitate this time. She pressed the silver chain directly against the sarcophagus. The runes flared not with the burning white of resistance, but with a controlled, cold blue light. The chain became a key. A segment of the stone floor, far from the sarcophagus, suddenly opened, revealing a dark, tight shaft plunging down into the earth. The energy radiating from the hole was palpable, a low rhythmic thrumming that sounded like a colossal, captive heartbeat. The cache, Seraphina breathed, her face drawn with anticipation and dread. The stored vitality is active. Julian had rigged the shaft with a discreet rappel line. I go first. I secure the perimeter. I don't trust that Cassian hasn't already laid a trap. He has, Seraphina said simply. He is watching. The opening of the door was the invitation he was waiting for. Julian descended first, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. He was moving from a world of spreadsheets to a world of shadows, trusting nothing but his training and the cold logic of the situation. The air below was dry, preserved by ancient enchantments. The chamber was immense, circular, and completely empty except for its deadly centerpiece. In the middle of the floor, a shallow, crystalline pool of liquid vitality glowed with a faint, otherworldly amber light. This was the cache of vitality. It looked like liquid gold, thick and luminous, and its scent was intoxicating, sweet, potent, and overwhelmingly alive. But the perimeter was not empty. As Julian's boots touched the floor, 3 distinct shades, gaunt, fast and silent entities of pure shadow, materialized from the walls. They were Cassian's trap. They moved with impossible speed, converging on Julian. Julian was a strategist, not a fighter, but he had prepared. He threw 2 high-intensity UV flash grenades he had procured through his network. The shades, creatures of shadow and cold, reacted with agonizing high-pitched shrieks as the searing, pure white light hit them. The distraction was brief, but it was all Julian needed. Seraphina. Now, he shouted into the darkness above. Seraphina dropped silently into the chamber, landing with an eerie grace that stirred not a speck of dust. She saw the shade struggling in the blinding light, and her red eyes flared. Cassian is crude, she hissed. He uses weaklings. She didn't engage them. She moved instantly towards the cache, the crystalline pool of vitality. She had to replenish the silver before the shades recovered or before Cassian arrived. As she knelt by the pool, the silver chain on her throat began to glow again, but this time with a frantic, pulsing red light. The silver was starved, and the cache was demanding a direct, terrifying exchange. Julian, the ritual. Seraphina gasped, the strain immense. The cache requires the anchor to initiate the transfer. Place your hands on the silver. Now. Julian knew this was the ultimate moment of trust. He was about to touch the very thing that was meant to burn her, to bind her, and in doing so, he would become the conduit for a power he couldn't comprehend. The shades were beginning to adapt to the light, their shrieks turning into a low, predatory hiss as they started moving toward him. He rushed to Seraphina, kneeling beside her. He looked at the heavy, rune-etched chain, then at her desperate, beautiful face. He placed both his human hands flat against the cold, pulsing silver chain on her throat, effectively trapping her. The moment his skin touched the runes, the pain, not his but hers, surged through him. It was a searing wave of agonized vitality, 1,000 years of suppression and hunger. His vision swam. Seraphina's eyes locked onto his and she began to speak, her voice a low, commanding chant. Anchor, bind me to this life. Consecrate the silver with your conviction. She plunged the tips of her fingers into the glowing, viscous amber pool of vitality. The liquid instantly rose, like a tide answering a silent command, moving up her fingers towards the silver chain. Julian watched, terrified and exhilarated, as the liquid gold essence made contact with the silver. A blinding, pure white flash erupted as the silver chain absorbed the life force. The chain vibrated violently, no longer red or blue, but a pure, intense white that felt like a bolt of cosmic power. In that agonizing, brilliant moment, Julian was the bridge between the immortal monster and its human leash. He felt the terrifying raw surge of Seraphina's power being fed through the chain, and his human mind strained to contain the reality of it all. The shades, recovering, let out a final, furious shriek and launched themselves at Julian. The cache was successfully replenishing the chain, but the cost, Julian realized, was far from over. The moment the cache of vitality flowed into the silver chain, transforming it into a conduit of pure, blinding white energy, the surrounding air became a battlefield of competing forces. Julian's hands, pressed against the supercharged silver on Seraphina's throat, were the epicenter of the transfer. He felt Seraphina's raw power, newly fueled and terrifyingly absolute, surge through the silver and into his own nervous system. It was a dizzying, painful sensation of being momentarily more than human. Seraphina let out a sound that was a mix of a triumphant roar and a deep, satisfied sigh. The agonizing exhaustion was instantly burned away, replaced by an ancient, terrifying resurgence of vitality. The cache is consumed. Seraphina's voice boomed, no longer a whisper but a resonant chord that echoed off the granite walls. The three shades, Cassian's proxies, screamed in utter agony. The newly charged silver was not just a restraint, it was now a weapon. Its purified energy was anathema to the dark, shadowy forms. Seraphina pulled her fingers from the empty cache pool and simultaneously slammed her forehead against Julian's. It was a brutal, non-human action, a forced contact that was meant to transfer not blood, but command. Julian, focus the anchor. She commanded telepathically, her voice ringing directly inside his skull. Julian, momentarily reeling from the psychic intrusion, found his clarity. He was the anchor, the tether to the logical, predictable world. With Seraphina's immense, surging power being channeled through the chain he was touching, Julian directed the blast of energy with his mind. He ripped his hands from the chain, thrusting them forward toward the nearest shade. The shade recoiled, but not before a faint blue-white electrical discharge leaped from Julian's fingertips, hitting the entity. The shade shrieked, dissolving instantly into a puff of sulfurous steam. Seraphina was already on the attack. Moving with impossible speed, a speed the failing silver had previously denied her, she became a blur of dark motion. She didn't need to touch the remaining two shades. The residual power of the recharged silver was now an aura of divine purification around her. She simply moved toward them. As she glided past the second shade, the white-hot energy emanating from the silver chain scorched the creature's form. It began to disintegrate from the inside out, writhing on the ground until it was nothing but a pile of ash. The last shade, sensing the overwhelming power, tried to flee into the granite wall. No escape. Seraphina snarled. She raised her hand, and the very air around the shade solidified. The creature was caught, struggling against an invisible, crushing pressure. Tell Cassian his tactics are crude, Seraphina said, her voice dripping with lethal scorn. She looked at Julian. Destroy the last connection. Julian understood. He picked up one of the UV flash grenades he had dropped and, with his human dexterity, precisely aimed and detonated it at the struggling shade. The burst of blinding light completed the destruction. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Julian's ragged breathing. He looked at Seraphina. She was radiant, terrifyingly alive. The silver chain, however, had cooled, returning to its heavy, rune-etched state, now possessing a deeper, more polished sheen. It was no longer a draining relic, it was a fully charged battery. The ritual is complete, Seraphina stated, smoothing down her robes. The silver will hold for the next 50 years. The price of that control was high, Julian. But the reward is higher. She approached the spot where the cache pool had been. The crystalline basin was now just dry stone. But etched onto the side of the pool, revealed only when the vitality was consumed, was a complex, interlocking set of runes and geographical coordinates. The second protocol, Seraphina whispered, tracing the new carvings. This is the location and the timing of the next cache of vitality. Julian brought out his digital scanner, his hand still trembling slightly from the psychic shock. He scanned the runes instantly. The coordinates point to the Forbidden City in Beijing, Julian reported, reading the translation on his screen. The inscription speaks of the Emperor's vault where human sorrow is buried in golden silence. And the time is 3 weeks from now. The next surge is tied to a specific solar-lunar eclipse. The stakes had escalated again. Beijing was far more politically sensitive, far more controlled than the ruins of Sicily or the tourist crypts of Verona. They would be moving from the shadows of history into the intense, modern scrutiny of a global superpower. And Cassian? Julian asked. You will know we succeeded. Seraphina gave a grim smile. He knows. And he knows where we are going. He will not send shades next time, Julian. He will move personally. His greatest fear is that my chain remains strong, a constant reminder of the restraint he himself tries to deny. She looked at Julian, her gaze intense. You risked everything, Julian. You became the conduit. You felt the burn of the silver and survived the transfer. You are not just an anchor, you are now a link, a mortal connected to my essence. I can feel your focus, your ambition, your fear. We are bound tighter than I ever intended. Julian looked at the chain, now gleaming with renewed power. He had chosen to touch the silver to become the bridge. He was now irrevocably entangled in her destiny, a fact that was both terrifying and intoxicating. Then let's use the link, Seraphina, Julian said, his own ambition surging to meet her power. We need a plan to vanish from Verona without leaving a trace for Cassian, and we need a strategy to bypass the highest level of human security in Beijing. The Forbidden City will be the ultimate test of our combined talents, your ancient power and my modern logistics. She nodded, a queen accepting the command of her general. Lead the way, anchor. The second protocol awaits. The aftermath of the ritual of renewal left Verona shaken, though the human authorities were only concerned with a sudden, localized power outage and some bizarre reports of sulfurous steam near the crypt. Julian Vane, however, ensured the cover story was impeccable. A private, lavish party in the crypt that went sideways due to an antique lighting system. He executed a flawless strategic retreat. Within 2 hours, all traces of their presence, including the neutralized shades' remains, were gone. By morning, Julian and Seraphina were on a private flight, not directly to Beijing, but to a secure, neutral location in Zurich. They needed the time and the distance to plan. Lord Cassian would know they were heading to the Forbidden City, and he would be preparing. In their ultra-secure penthouse overlooking Lake Zurich, the dynamic between them had subtly changed. Seraphina, invigorated by the replenished silver, was radiating a cold, focused power. The silver chain no longer looked like a shackle of pain, but a symbol of supreme control. Julian, having channeled that power, was now marked. He felt an intense, near-psychic awareness of her emotional state, a terrifyingly intimate link forged by the ritual. The Beijing blueprint. The Forbidden City presented a monumental challenge. It wasn't an abandoned ruin or a tourist crypt. It was the historical and cultural heart of a global power, secured by multiple layers of military and digital surveillance. The cache is hidden beneath the Emperor's vault, Seraphina explained, tracing a complex 3D holographic map of the Forbidden City Julian had procured. The protocol inscription mentions, human sorrow buried in golden silence. The priors chose it because the vault, where the emperors stored their most painful secrets and compromised goods, is a place of immense concentrated ambition and unfulfilled desire, perfect fuel for the vitality. Julian focused on the logistics. We can't just dig. We can't cause a major incident. My network can get us past the outer perimeter, but the inner security, particularly around the vault, is ancient and specialized. We need a ghost key. The lock will again require the chain's essence, Seraphina confirmed. But the protocol gave us more than just location this time. It included a warning. She recalled the ancient runes transferred from the protocol stone. The vault's entrance is guarded by a psychological ward, a defense mechanism created by the priors. Any entity approaching the lock will be subjected to the projection of their deepest, most destructive regret. Julian looked at her, his heart dropping. Regret? You mean your past? My past, Julian, is 2 millennia of choices, Seraphina said grimly. It is a labyrinth of loss and blood. If I confront my deepest regret, the initial choice to embrace the power and be bound by the silver, I will shatter my focus. The silver could either overheat and consume me, or detach completely, unleashing the beast in the most secured place on earth. The danger was clear. Seraphina could open the lock, but the price might be her sanity and Julian's life. Chess pawn the Cassian variable. Julian's priority shifted from securing the location to neutralizing Lord Cassian. Cassian will not make a move until the surge begins, Julian predicted. He is too arrogant to risk exposure early. He will wait for the moment of our greatest vulnerability, when you are engaging the lock and the regret ward. Julian used his financial expertise to create a massive targeted digital dust storm around Cassian. He leaked false information about a massive financial collapse tied to a company Cassian secretly controlled, forcing the vampire to deal with the intricacies of the human world to protect his centuries-old wealth. He respects chaos, but he respects his wealth more, Julian explained to Seraphina. This will slow him down, distract his proxies and force him into the open. We need to lure him away from the Forbidden City. Seraphina smiled, a chilling appreciation in her red eyes. You are the perfect predator for this world, Julian. You weaponize inconvenience. Gemstone the human key. Julian finalized his plan. It relied entirely on the psychological link forged during the ritual of renewal. We cannot eliminate your regret, Seraphina. But we can anchor you through it, Julian stated, displaying a modified diagram of the vault entrance. I will not simply touch the chain this time, I will be your counterfocus. When you engage the lock, you will be overwhelmed by the past. I will anchor you to the future. The future? Our future. The goal, your freedom from the silver. I will use the link we share to focus your mind not on the agony of the past, but on the potential of the future. The immense power, the access, the secrets, the whole reason you took me as a partner, Julian said, his voice hard with cold, necessary ambition. Julian also had a physical solution. He had custom-crafted a device, a highly specialized gauntlet made from a non-conductive composite metal but featuring 3 small, rune-etched silver contact points that perfectly aligned with the runes on Seraphina's chain. When you touch the lock, I will wear this and press the contact points against your chain, Julian explained. It will amplify my presence as the anchor, forcing our minds to sync. If the regret ward tries to pull you back, my focus will slam you forward. But there is a risk, Seraphina. He looked into her eyes, no longer afraid of the monster, only afraid of the failure. If my focus isn't absolute, if I doubt for a moment, the regret ward could use our psychic link to project your pain onto me. I could suffer centuries of your regret in a single moment, or worse, the feedback could overload your chain. Seraphina reached out and traced the edges of his ambitious, cold smile. You gamble your life on the sharpness of your will, Julian Vane. It is the most beautiful thing about you. She leaned in, her voice a low, intimate command. Prepare the logistics, anchor. The Emperor's vault demands absolute clarity. The game is set. Julian's logistics were a masterpiece of modern camouflage. They entered Beijing not as the glamorous couple, but as inconspicuous, high-level international cultural preservation experts, arriving with diplomatic credentials he'd expertly fabricated. Their mission, a private, unprecedented survey of the Forbidden City's ancient substructures, a project sanctioned by shell organizations that channeled millions into local cultural funds. The Forbidden City, the heart of golden silence and buried sorrow, was a world away from the ruins of Verona. Here the energy wasn't raw and sulfurous, but cold, ancient, and heavy with human history. The day of the solar lunar eclipse, the time of the second cash surge, they were granted access to the deepest, least visited section, the perimeter of the Emperor's vault. Julian was dressed in a specialized technical suit, the non-conductive gauntlet concealed beneath his sleeve. Seraphina wore a traditional high-collared black silk garment that made the silver chain less conspicuous but emphasized her regal, cold bearing. The vault was deep below ground, accessed through a tiny hidden door disguised as a minor utility access point. The air inside was thick and stale, tasting of dust and long-dead ambition. The vault itself is protected by an ancient geomantic lock, Seraphina whispered, her voice low. It doesn't respond to physical force. It responds to emotional signature. The priors designed it to filter out anyone driven by simple greed. But they added the regret ward to specifically stop creatures like me, the immortal, burdened by memory. They found the lock, a simple dark copper plate set into the wall, unmarked by any visible mechanism. It was radiating a faint, complex psychic pulse. The surge begins in 15 minutes, Julian warned, checking the chronometer on his gauntlet. Cassian will be near. He's either waiting for us to fail, or he's preparing his own desperate entry. Seraphina did not hesitate. The replenished silver gave her the certainty she needed. The only way through is absolute submission to the lock's demands, she said. I must initiate the contact. You must anchor me through the storm, Julian. Don't let me drown in 2,000 years of sorrow. She slowly raised her hands. Julian, his heart pounding but his mind a cold, calculating machine, activated his customized gauntlet. The 3 small silver contact points on his palm began to pulse with a low blue light. Seraphina placed the silver chain against the copper lock. Julian immediately pressed his gauntlet against the chain, ensuring absolute contact between his device, her silver, and her throat. He was the conduit, the forced physical and mental bridge. The psychic storm. The moment the contact was made, the cavern dissolved. Julian didn't see the walls, he saw Seraphina's mind. The regret ward attacked instantly, flooding their linked consciousness with images of Seraphina's past, weaponized and terrifying. Julian was slammed with a sensory overload that drove him to his knees, his grip on the gauntlet the only thing holding him upright. He saw himself as Seraphina, a brilliant, passionate scholar in ancient Rome. She was not a monster, she was a woman obsessed with the cosmos and forbidden alchemy, desperate to break the limits of mortality. He felt the betrayal of the ancient cult that offered her eternal life but forced upon her the silver chain as a lifetime of penance. He saw the face of her first human lover, a kind, mortal man who aged and withered in a handful of years, leaving Seraphina standing over his grave, condemned to endless, desolate longevity. He felt the cold, sick rush of bloodlust from her earliest feedings, the primal shame of being reduced to a predator. The regret ward was specifically targeting the most painful, most destructive moment, the agonizing, absolute regret of having chosen power over peace, an eternal life of bondage over a brief life of freedom. The pain was physical. Julian felt a searing, metaphysical agony of loss and loneliness that spanned centuries. He began to gasp, his grip slipping. "Let go, Julian." Seraphina's voice was a ragged, terrified whisper in his mind. She was weeping, not with tears but with the raw, soundless despair of a broken soul. "It is too strong. I cannot hold the focus." Her face was etched with a profound, terrifying sorrow, and the silver chain on her throat was pulsating dangerously, flickering between controlled blue and consuming red. The lock was opening but her soul was breaking. Anchor to the future. Julian fought back. He couldn't eliminate the pain but he could change the focus. He channeled his own purely human ambition into the link. He didn't fight the regret, he leveraged it. "No." Julian roared, his voice physically breaking the silence of the chamber, cutting through the psychic storm. His hands, gripping the gauntlet and the silver, pressed harder. "Do not look at the past, Seraphina. That life is dust. Your lover is ash. That is the price you paid. Now demand the reward." He slammed the vision of the future into her mind. A brutal, crystalline image of an unlocked future where the silver chain was merely an ornament, a trophy. He showed her the visions of the ultimate power they could command once the Carthan Protocol was fully secured. "This is the goal," Julian commanded in their psychic link. "You did not endure 2,000 years of agony to fail at the finish line. Focus on the protocol. Focus on the next cache. Focus on the freedom we will seize together." Julian's sheer, unyielding human will, the ambition that had allowed him to master the world of finance, acted as a devastating counterforce to the regret ward. It was the absolute, uncompromised commitment to the future against the crippling weight of the past. Seraphina's sobbing ceased. Her red eyes, swimming in the torment of centuries, slowly cleared. They locked onto Julian's and the raw, ancient power stabilized. "The protocol," she gasped, refocusing. With one final wrenching mental effort, Seraphina slammed her immense, disciplined will back onto the lock. The copper plate instantly glowed a triumphant pure white. The psychic pulse ceased. The regret ward was defeated. With a deep, grinding sound, the entire copper plate recessed into the wall, revealing a sealed stone door and a complex matrix of new runes. The second protocol was within reach. Julian collapsed, gasping, sweat pouring off him. He had stared into the abyss of her soul and nearly fallen. He looked at Seraphina. She was standing, exhausted but victorious. "Well played, Anchor," Seraphina murmured, her voice laced with a frightening mix of gratitude and renewed power. But before they could move, a cold, mocking voice echoed through the cavern, filled with aristocratic malice. "A beautiful performance. But your focus was loud enough to be heard across the continent, Seraphina." A figure materialized from the shadows near the entrance, tall, impeccably dressed, and radiating a careless, absolute power. It was Lord Cassian, and unlike Seraphina, his ancient, elaborate silver chain was worn loosely, almost negligently, a clear sign that he had corrupted its full suppressive power. "You chose a mortal toy over your own control, Seraphina," Cassian drawled, his eyes fixed on Julian. "A charmingly fragile weakness." And now, the reward for your agonizing effort belongs to me. The silence in the Emperor's vault was broken by the cold, measured sound of Lord Cassian's footsteps. He sauntered into the light, a vision of dark, effortless aristocracy. Unlike Seraphina's chain, which was a heavy, rune-etched collar of necessity, Cassian's was a fine, almost decorative silver torque twisted with subtle, almost invisible knots, a sign that he had mastered and corrupted its binding power years ago. Cassian stopped, his gaze sweeping over the exhausted Julian and the newly opened entrance to the second protocol. Seraphina, Cassian said, his voice a smooth baritone laced with contempt. You persist in this exhausting charade of restraint. 2,000 years and you still cling to the silver fetters designed to punish you. And now you cling to a mortal who sweats on your behalf. He looked directly at Julian, a look that was both dismissive and lethally accurate. You little mouse, are the loudest anchor I have ever encountered. You nearly shattered her mind with your crude ambition. But you served your purpose. Now be a good boy and step away from the spoils. Seraphina straightened, pushing herself off the wall. The exhaustion was still visible, but the surge from the Verona cache had given her the strength for this fight. She placed herself squarely between Julian and the antagonist. Cassian, Seraphina's voice was steady, a clear, dangerous challenge. Your path leads to decay. You resist the silver, corrupt its power, and you are slowly but surely descending into the feral chaos the priors tried to prevent. The protocol is for those who seek control, not those who seek oblivion. Control is a delusion, Seraphina. Power is the only truth, Cassian countered, his eyes flashing with a wicked amusement. I will take the protocol, destroy the caches, and shatter the knowledge of the priors forever. Then we, the ancients, will be truly free, free of the silver, free of the rules, free to feed without the ridiculous burden of human morality. Cassian didn't waste time on philosophical debate. He moved. His speed was terrifying, faster than the shades, faster than Seraphina's newly replenished movements. He blurred toward them, his hand darting out, not for Seraphina but for the second protocol door. Seraphina reacted instantly. A wave of shimmering, focused telekinetic force erupted from her, channeled and magnified by the charged silver chain. The force slammed into Cassian, but he barely stumbled. He used his corrupted silver torque to deflect the impact, the metal humming darkly. Still fighting within the prior's narrow parameters, Seraphina? Pathetic. Cassian sneered. The two vampires engaged in a duel that was part physical, part metaphysical. Seraphina's movements were precise, directed, and fiercely controlled, powered by the pure energy of her fully charged silver. Cassian, however, fought with reckless, overwhelming power, his every move betraying the chaos he embodied. He utilized a dark, shadow-like energy that seemed to consume the light, attempting to envelop Seraphina. She retaliated with bursts of controlled kinetic force, using the silver chain like a focus for a divine shield, pushing back the encroaching darkness. The air was ripped apart by their clash, and the granite walls of the ancient vault groaned under the pressure. Julian knew he couldn't stand by. He was a strategist, not a fighter, but he had a weapon, the anchor link. He quickly scrambled to a tactical position, out of the immediate physical melee but close enough to maintain the psychic link. He raised his gauntlet, aiming the silver contact points at Seraphina's back. Seraphina. Cassian is aiming for your neck. Julian shouted, forcing his command through the psychic channel. Your focus is too wide. Target the torque. Seraphina, momentarily distracted by Cassian's speed, faltered. Cassian seized the opening, his shadow energy coiling around her arm. But Julian's warning, delivered with the amplified, urgent clarity of the anchor, hit her mind instantly. She snapped her focus back, not on Cassian's body but on his silver torque. She concentrated her force, channeling the pure, focused energy of her charged chain into a razor-thin blade of kinetic power. The blow hit Cassian's corrupt torque, and the effect was immediate and catastrophic. The pure energy of the replenished silver reacted violently with the corruption in Cassian's metal. The torque didn't shatter, it seized. Cassian let out a roar of pain that was far more primal than Seraphina's agonizing sounds during the ritual. The surge of pure energy instantly negated the centuries of corruption he had built up, forcing the full, searing pain of the silver back onto him. He staggered back, clutching his throat, his face a mask of shocked agony. You have purified the chain. Cassian gasped, his breath ragged. The anchor ensures my control, Cassian, Seraphina said, seizing the opportunity. The price of the protocol is the pure use of the silver. A price you were too arrogant to pay. She did not pursue him. Her focus was on the objective. Julian. The door. Julian didn't wait. He rushed to the stone door, which was now vibrating faintly, unlocked but sealed. Seraphina joined him, pressing her charged silver chain against a central etched rune. The powerful, purified silver acted as the ultimate key. The door swung inward with a grinding sound, revealing a small, secure compartment. Inside lay the second protocol, not a stone cube this time, but a scroll of shimmering, metallic parchment. Cassian, his power momentarily crippled by the searing pain of the reactivated silver, was forced to watch them claim the prize. He knew he was beaten for now, his corrupted chain useless against Seraphina's purified one. "This is not over, Seraphina," Cassian hissed, his eyes blazing with promised vengeance. "You and your little mortal leash will be hunted across the globe. You cling to the rules. I will burn the playing field." With a final, contemptuous look at Julian, Cassian dissolved into the shadows, a trail of faintly scorched air marking his retreat. Seraphina snatched the parchment. The energy flowing from the scroll was immediately recognized by her chain, and the new knowledge began to transfer in a soft, silent flow of light. "It is a complete map," Seraphina stated, her voice tight with triumph and urgency. "Not just the location of the third cache but a list of the other chained, those who seek to break the chains, and those who seek to reinforce them. We now know our enemies, Julian." She looked at Julian, her red eyes burning with a dangerous mix of respect and possessive intensity. "You saved my control, Julian. You are no longer just an anchor, you are my shield. Now tell me, where is the third cache located?" Julian, exhausted but exhilarated, checked the translated coordinates on his scanner. The inscription speaks of the Island of Sacrifice, where the sea claims the final truth. The coordinates point to a remote, tiny island off the coast of Patagonia. The surge is in 4 weeks. Julian looked at the beautiful, deadly creature standing over the ruins of an ancient battle, the purified silver chain gleaming on her throat. They had won the battle, but the war for the silver's future had just begun. The weeks leading up to the Patagonian journey were spent in absolute isolation. Julian had purchased a remote, high-tech sanctuary overlooking the Swiss Alps. It was a strategic choice, a fortress of glass and steel where their secrets could be protected, and where Julian could fully decipher the second protocol while Seraphina recovered the energy she spent fighting Cassian. The scroll was a treasury of knowledge. Julian quickly translated the intricate runes, confirming the location of the third cache on a desolate island chain off the Patagonian coast, and detailing the specific astronomical conditions required for the final ritual of maintenance. But the most critical revelation was the list of the chained. It was an internal registry of every entity bound by the Carthan silver, a secret network of predators bound by the same curse. The list included names Seraphina recognized from ancient history, powerful, dangerous beings. Julian's focus, however, was on their relationship. The anchor link, forged and amplified during the 2 rituals, was now a constant, terrifying reality. Julian could not only sense Seraphina's emotional state, the faint, perpetual ache of the silver, the simmering ambition, the deep-seated loneliness, but he often felt a shadow of her hunger, a cold, exhilarating thrumming that was utterly alien to his human nature. One evening, Julian found Seraphina standing on the glass balcony, staring out at the frozen peaks. She wasn't wearing her disguise, her clothes were simple, and the purified silver chain was stark against her skin, no longer a mark of shame but a symbol of her lethal resolve. "The protocol confirmed what I suspected, Julian," Seraphina murmured, her voice carrying a profound weariness. "The priors created a society of chained slaves. They designed the maintenance ritual to be so punishingly difficult that we would spend centuries hunting each other for the vital fuel, never questioning the possibility of freedom." Julian approached her, the new link causing a deep resonance between them. He could feel her fear of returning to the uncontrolled chaos that Cassian embraced. "We are not slaves, Seraphina," Julian stated, his voice firm. "We are partners. We used their protocol to our advantage. We took the timetable, we replenished the silver, and we fought their champions. We now know that the Patagonian cache is the last one, and the ritual there is different." Julian pointed to the translated runes on his tablet. "The protocol states that the final cache can either be used for maintenance as we did in Verona, or for dissolution. The priors built an emergency failsafe, a method to permanently dissolve the silver's power source, effectively breaking the chains forever." Seraphina turned slowly, her red eyes burning with hope that she had denied herself for centuries. "Dissolution. A clean severance from the curse? A permanent break from the silver's power," Julian confirmed. "But the ritual requires a complete transfer of the last cache's vitality, administered not by an anchor, but by a conduit of absolute conviction." someone willing to risk their own essence for the chained entity's freedom. Seraphina reached out and placed her cold hand on Julian's chest, directly over his heart. Julian felt the immediate, intense cold of her touch, but also the subtle, electrical hum of her purified silver chain. "The ritual demands the risk of a life to grant an immortal's freedom," Seraphina whispered. The priors ensured that no chained entity would ever risk their precious mortal lover. They made the price too high, the conviction too absolute. She looked deep into his eyes, her gaze no longer testing him, but appealing to the dangerous ambition that mirrored her own. "You are my anchor, Julian. You have become my shield. I can feel your mind, your singular drive. You are the only person who could possibly possess the absolute conviction to perform this final act. To shatter the silver, you must be willing to sacrifice everything." Julian didn't flinch. He grasped her hand, his warm, mortal flesh against her icy grip. The danger was immense, but the reward, the sight of her, free of the silver, her power unbound but given to him in trust, was intoxicating. "My conviction is absolute, Seraphina. I want the knowledge you possess, the power that comes with standing by your side. I choose the future we mapped out in Beijing," Julian stated, the truth ringing with cold sincerity. "I will break the chain. We will be partners, bound by choice, not by curse." The confession was a final, terrible leap into the dark. It cemented their relationship, a bond built on shared danger, mutual leverage, and a lethal, growing attraction to each other's absolute control. For the first time since their eyes first met across the ballroom, Seraphina let her guard down. She closed the distance between them, and her cold lips met his in a kiss that was both a terrifying promise and a final, binding oath. It was a kiss of ice and fire, of eternal curse and mortal ambition. The silver chain pressed against his neck, no longer a shackle, but a testament to the bond he was risking his life to dissolve. "Then let us go to the island of sacrifice, Julian," Seraphina breathed, pulling back, her eyes blazing with newfound, unbound hope. "Let us claim my freedom and begin our reign." The journey to the isolated volcanic archipelago off the coast of Patagonia was Julian's most complex logistical nightmare yet. He used 3 different layers of shell companies and multiple aircraft to obscure their trail, knowing that Lord Cassian and potentially other chained entities would be converging on the island of sacrifice. Julian had chartered a state-of-the-art research vessel, disguised as a marine biology project. The crew was handpicked, unaware that their lead scientist, Seraphina, was an ancient vampire seeking freedom from her silver shackle. In the ship's secure, deep-sea laboratory, Julian and Seraphina reviewed the final 3rd protocol. The document detailed the exact location of the 3rd cache, a deep, geothermal fissure on the volcanic island's summit, and the complex steps for the Dissolution Ritual. The ritual demands the cache's vitality to be poured directly onto the silver chain at the precise moment of the celestial apex, Seraphina explained, tracing the ancient runes. "The conduit of absolute conviction. You, Julian, must maintain physical contact with the chain to focus the dissolution. Your conviction will be the catalyst." Julian looked at the non-conductive gauntlet he now wore constantly. It was his shield and his weapon. "The danger is not just Cassian, Seraphina," Julian said, pointing to the list of the chain from the 2nd protocol. "There are 2 other entities confirmed to be moving toward this region. Baroness Isolde, a meticulous strategist who seeks to reinforce her chain, and a feral creature known only as the Hunter, who seeks to destroy the entire protocol." "A 3-sided war," Seraphina observed, a cold thrill in her voice. "The final confrontation for the future of the chained." Cold faced the first strike. As the research vessel approached the desolate, wind-swept Patagonian islands, the first signs of trouble emerged. Julian's satellite analysis detected a sudden, localized magnetic anomaly, a deliberate, powerful signal jam, emanating from the largest island. "Cassian," Seraphina stated instantly. "He has sealed the island. He doesn't want competition from the other chained, and he certainly doesn't want us succeeding." Julian confirmed the location of the jammer, a high ridge near the summit, directly blocking access to the cache site. "He's not waiting for us to make the move," Julian deduced. "He's holding the island hostage. He wants to force a confrontation on his terms." They decided on a risky, immediate infiltration. Under the cover of a freezing, torrential midnight storm, Julian piloted a stealth Zodiac boat toward the island's least accessible cove. As they made landfall on the black, volcanic beach, the energy on the island was oppressive. The intense geothermal activity combined with the impending celestial alignment was creating a low, psychic thrum, a sound that Seraphina, with her ancient senses, felt acutely. "He is near, Julian," Seraphina whispered, her hand moving unconsciously to the silver chain. He is waiting for the moment of ultimate focus. They began the arduous, vertical ascent toward the jammer's location, moving through a landscape of sharp volcanic rock. The ambush. They were halfway up the ridge when the ambush was sprung. It wasn't Cassian himself, but a coordinated, lethal trap designed to separate Julian from Seraphina. 3 figures, moving with the preternatural speed and silence of the chained, materialized from the shadows of the rocks. They weren't proxies, they were Baroness Isolde's servants, human cultists granted enhanced strength through subtle blood bonds, all wielding ancient, specially treated iron weaponry. Iron, Julian remembered from the old lore Seraphina had shared, was an element that distorted a vampire's focus, preventing them from channeling their energy effectively. It was a crude, brilliant tactical move by Isolde. Separate the leash from the monster. One of the cultists shrieked, lunging directly at Julian with an iron spear. Seraphina moved to intercept, but the sight of the iron made her hesitate. The metal was anathema to the purity of her silver. Her power, channeled through the chain, could be dangerously scattered by the metal. Focus, Seraphina. Julian roared, his mind instantly accessing the psychic link. He projected an image of the Dissolution Ritual, the moment of her freedom, directly into her consciousness, overriding the iron's mental disruption. While Seraphina was momentarily anchored, Julian, despite his human fragility, acted. He didn't fight the cultists, he fought the terrain. He pulled the pin on a flashbang grenade and threw it directly into a geothermal vent behind the attackers. The explosion wasn't big, but the immediate release of superheated steam and volcanic ash blinded the cultists. Seraphina seized the opening. Her eyes blazing, she used the purified silver chain not as a weapon, but as a deflector. She created a focused wave of kinetic energy that deflected the iron spears and slammed the cultists against the sharp volcanic rock. They were wounded but not neutralized. They are Isolde's shield. Seraphina gasped, her breath ragged. She is already at the cache site, preparing for maintenance. Cassian is a distraction. Julian looked up the ridge. Cassian's jammer was still active, but the true threat, Baroness Isolde, was preparing to use the final cache to permanently secure her chain, destroying the chance for dissolution. We have to move. Julian commanded, his focus absolute. He had to get Seraphina to the cache before Isolde started her ritual. As they ran past the stunned cultists, Julian spotted the source of the magnetic jam, a small, crudely built antenna on a distant outcropping. Cassian is still playing the strategist, Julian muttered. We fight Isolde first. Then we deal with the architect of the chaos. They ran toward the summit, their bond, part love, part lethal necessity, the only thing holding them together against the final storm. Julian and Seraphina burst onto the summit of the volcanic island. The wind shrieked, and the sky above was a chaotic canvas of churning clouds, perfectly aligning with the impending celestial apex of the ritual. The third cache was located at the lip of a massive, gently steaming geothermal fissure, a natural crucible of elemental power. Baroness Isolde was already there, a severe figure draped in dark velvet that looked absurdly out of place against the volcanic rock. Her silver chain was thick and ornate, gleaming dully. She was attended by a small group of her fortified cultists, who were preparing a ritual circle designed for maintenance. They were using specialized metallic vessels, clearly intending to collect the cache's vitality to reinforce their own chains. Isolde looked up, her face a mask of cold fury. Seraphina. The scholar clinging to her leash. I should have known you would interfere. Isolde, Seraphina countered, moving with purposeful strides toward the fissure. You cling to the curse. I seek freedom. Freedom is chaos. Only the chain grants order. Isolde shrieked, and her cultists immediately moved to block Seraphina's path, their iron weapons flashing. This time Seraphina did not hold back. The risk of the iron scattering her focus was too great, so she avoided direct contact. Instead, she unleashed a wave of raw kinetic force, channeled through her purified silver chain. The power was immense, fueled by the last cache's surge, and it didn't discriminate. The force slammed into Isolde's cultists, tossing them like rag dolls across the rocks. Isolde, however, was a master of deflection. She used her own chain to create a shimmering, complex silver shield, absorbing Seraphina's impact. The shockwave of the two powers colliding tore through the air. You are strong, Seraphina. But I am patient. Isolde yelled, her eyes locked on the geothermal fissure. The celestial apex is in 2 minutes. I will not allow you to waste this vitality on a sentimental dream of dissolution. Isolde began the maintenance chant, her voice a low, powerful drone that resonated with the geothermal energy. The final cache, a geyser of shimmering liquid amber vitality, began to bubble and rise from the fissure. Julian knew the time for strategy was over. They had to interrupt the chant and initiate the dissolution ritual immediately. Seraphina. Maker. Dissolution now. Julian roared. He moved around the melee, ignoring the wounded cultists, and rushed to the lip of the fissure. He pulled out the final component, a specialized titanium vessel Julian had designed to contain and direct the volatile liquid vitality. Seraphina saw his move and broke off her attack on Isolde, recognizing the priority. She had to trust Julian completely. "I trust your conviction, Anchor," she shouted, moving to stand right at the edge of the geothermal vent. Isolde shrieked, realizing their plan. She launched a final massive blast of dark energy, intending to hit Julian and sever the bond. Seraphina intercepted the blow with her own body, channeling the impact through her silver chain. The force of the combined energy knocked her to her knees, but the purified silver held. Julian reached the fissure. The liquid vitality was surging out, thick, luminous, and overwhelmingly powerful. He plunged his vessel in, collecting the full chaotic essence of the final cache. The celestial apex was upon them. The light of the eclipse was strange and profound, casting the summit in an eerie silver-blue glow. Julian moved to Seraphina's side. Isolde, recovering, was already scrambling toward them. "Now Julian." "Absolute conviction," Seraphina commanded, her voice ragged. Julian placed the titanium vessel containing the final cache's total vitality next to her neck. He then donned his non-conductive gauntlet and, with a deep breath, placed his hand firmly against the purified silver chain. The psychic link exploded. Julian didn't see the past or the future. He saw the absolute purity of Seraphina's desire for freedom. "I break the curse. I choose the bond," Julian commanded in the psychic link, pouring his entire absolute conviction, his faith in their partnership, his dedication to their shared power, into the silver. He simultaneously tipped the titanium vessel, pouring the entirety of the surging liquid vitality directly onto the silver chain. The reaction was blinding. The liquid amber essence hit the purified silver, and instead of being absorbed, it ignited. A towering pillar of pure, white-hot energy erupted from the silver chain, straight toward the celestial apex above. This was the dissolution ritual. The final cache was not absorbed, it was expended to permanently neutralize the chain's binding runes. Isolde arrived a moment too late. She ran into the fringe of the white energy, and her corrupt silver chain instantly burned out, seizing and then cracking under the weight of the pure, neutralizing force. She screamed, a sound of devastating defeat, and collapsed, her immense power now loose and unusable. The pillar of light vanished as quickly as it came. The silver chain on Seraphina's neck was no longer gleaming. It was dull, blackened, and shattered. The ancient runes were melted, the links broken. Julian pulled his hand back. He was exhausted but alive. Seraphina stood completely still. The terrifying, pure control she had maintained for 2 millennia was gone. The fangs were no longer restrained, they were visible, sharp, and curved. Her eyes were a wild, untamed crimson. She was free. She was pure, unbound power. She looked at Julian. The absolute conviction he had poured into the ritual had not destroyed him, but it had left him utterly exposed, a mortal tethered to an unbound god. "Julian," she murmured, her voice deep, powerful, and utterly devoid of the silver's former pain. She reached out and touched his face with a hand that was now warm, mortal temperature. "You have broken the cage. You are the conduit of conviction." Then a cold, mocking laugh echoed from the high rocks. "A beautiful freedom, Seraphina. But unbound means uncontrolled." Lord Cassian stood above them, no longer crippled, his corrupted torque replaced by a simple, lethal iron collar, a temporary restraint he had clearly prepared. He had let Isolde and Seraphina fight, waiting for the precise moment of their vulnerability. "The chain is gone, Seraphina. The power is yours. But the hunger is now absolute," Cassian sneered. "And the first taste your freedom demands will be the life essence of the mortal fool who gave it to you." Julian looked at Seraphina, her unbound power radiating, her beautiful eyes wild with the initial raw surge of absolute freedom. The ultimate challenge was not the ritual, but the choice she was about to make. Lord Cassian's cold laughter echoed across the volcanic summit. He stood, impeccable even in his iron shackle, his power unchecked and his malice absolute. He had predicted this moment. The unbound hunger of Seraphina would consume the mortal anchor who had given her freedom. Julian stood his ground, exhausted but utterly focused. He looked at Seraphina, her unbound power radiating a terrifying raw heat. The shattered pieces of the silver chain lay around her feet, her former cage now her sacrifice. Her fangs were extended, sharp and pure white, and her eyes, an untamed crimson, were fixed on him. Cassian saw the hunger. There is no morality left, Seraphina. The silver is gone. The absolute conviction only focused the power, it didn't restrain the beast. Claim your prize. Feed on the fool who trusted you. Seraphina moved. She moved not with the restrained grace of the chained, but with the dizzying lethal speed of an apex predator. Julian felt the rush of wind, the searing cold of her approach, and the overwhelming scent of raw bloodlust that now governed her being. She was upon him in an instant. Julian closed his eyes, not in resignation but in absolute conviction. He projected his entire being into the psychic link, his ambition, his trust, his choice to be bound to her. He didn't fight her hunger, he accepted it, channeling his mind's focus to the bond they had forged. Seraphina's movement halted a hair's breadth from his throat. Her fangs were inches from his jugular. The raw power surged from her body, threatening to incinerate his mortal form. But her crimson eyes locked onto his, and in the overwhelming chaos of her unbound power, she saw not prey but the anchor, the human who had endured her agony, navigated her secrets, and shattered her eternal curse. She saw the choice he had given her, primal power or absolute partnership. A slow, shuddering breath escaped her lips. The wildness in her eyes receded, replaced by a deep, powerful control that transcended the silver. The control was no longer forced by a relic, it was chosen by her will. The fangs slowly, agonizingly retracted. Seraphina leaned in, her unbound lips brushing his ear, her cold breath a whisper of ultimate power. You were right, Julian. The greatest power is choice. She turned, her movements now fluid, devastating, and entirely directed by her will. She faced Lord Cassian, her unbound power an absolute, visible force. The beast is mine to control, Cassian. The anchor made me free, not feral. Cassian roared in frustration and disbelief. His entire ideology, that freedom meant chaos, was shattered by her choice. He launched a frantic, desperate attack, attempting to use the pure, volatile energy of his corrupted chain's remnant. You are a fool. You condemn yourself to weakness. Cassian screamed. Seraphina didn't waste power. She struck with the focused intent of a predator who had just confirmed her own lethal control. With a movement too fast for the eye to track, she disarmed him of the iron shackle and, using her newly unbound telekinetic power, she compressed his body into the unforgiving volcanic rock. Cassian, whose power was based on corruption and chaos, was no match for Seraphina's purified, focused will. The iron shackle was not needed. Her unbound power was the ultimate restraint. You preached chaos, Cassian, Seraphina said, her voice a cold, final judgment. Now you will find the silence the priors feared. She left him imprisoned in the rock, defeated, but left alive to endure the absolute knowledge of his failure. The celestial apex passed. Julian and Seraphina stood alone on the summit, the shattered silver at her feet. The storm cleared, and the dawn broke over the Patagonian sea, casting a profound golden light over the new world they had created. Julian looked at Seraphina. She was radiant, terrifyingly beautiful, and utterly unbound. She was no longer a slave to the silver or the beast. She was a queen of control. The chain is gone, Julian, Seraphina said, reaching for his hand. Her touch was warm, a deliberate, chosen warmth that shocked him. The control is mine, but the absolute bond remains. I am bound to your conviction and you are bound to my power. Julian felt the new bond. It was no longer the painful, strained tether of the anchor and the chained. It was a pure, psychic link, a terrifying, exhilarating merger of their minds and ambitions. He could feel her power and she could feel his unwavering resolve. The protocol is fulfilled, Julian said, his own ambition shining brightly. We have the knowledge of the other chained, the power of unbound will, and the logistics to command this world. Seraphina's lips curved into a final, triumphant smile. She placed her hand, now free of any metal, on Julian's chest, directly over his heart. The old world, ruled by the prior's obsolete rules, is over, Julian. We begin a new age, an age of absolute control. The other chained will either kneel or they will be shattered. And you, my anchor, my shield, my absolute bond, she leaned in, her eyes reflecting the rising sun, will rule with me. Julian Vane, the ruthless CEO, looked out over the boundless ocean. He had traded his safe, predictable world for an immortal shadow war, and he had won. He was not merely her lover or her partner. He was the mortal half of an eternal power. The silver chain was broken, but their bond was forged forever. 6 months later, the world was quietly, meticulously being reorganized. The Island of Sacrifice incident was scrubbed from all official records, filed away as an inexplicable seismic event. Julian Vane, the master of information and logistics, ensured that the veil of human reality remained intact, even as he and Seraphina ruled from the shadows. Their headquarters was no longer a Swiss penthouse but a sprawling ancient compound in the remote Andes Mountains, a fortress powered by Julian's technology and warded by Seraphina's unbound power. The absolute bond between them was the foundation of their new empire. It was an unbreakable link of shared power, ambition, and intimacy. Julian could still feel the echoes of Seraphina's vast power, a constant, exhilarating hum of vitality that fueled his own relentless focus. Saraphina, in turn, relied on Julian's perfect clarity and human precision to navigate the complex web of global finance and politics. The other chained entities, listed in the second protocol, were the first priority. Baroness Isolde, defeated and with her chain crippled, was given a choice: submission or dissolution. Isolde, broken by the loss of her precious control, chose to swear an eternal oath of loyalty to Seraphina. She was allowed to keep her freedom, but her power was now permanently linked to and regulated by Seraphina's will. She became their silent enforcer in Europe. Lord Cassian was not so lucky. His imprisonment in the volcanic rock of Patagonia was not permanent. He escaped, as Julian predicted, but his defeat had been absolute. The sight of Seraphina's unbound power and her cold, calculated control had broken his spirit. Julian's network tracked Cassian to a forgotten monastery in the Himalayas. Seraphina did not pursue him. She didn't need to. He will never challenge the absolute bond, Julian, Seraphina had observed, watching the live satellite feed of Cassian's miserable existence. His greatest torment is the knowledge that the chaos he sought was defeated by the choice I made. He will live out his eternity as a cautionary tale. The remnants of the Carthan priors, a few scattered, aging fanatics who still guarded minor pieces of the lore, were swiftly and silently dealt with. Julian used his logistics to strip them of their finances and their influence, leaving Seraphina to sever the final spiritual bonds. The possibility of the silver chain being reforged was eliminated. One evening, Julian stood with Seraphina in the vast, obsidian library of their new fortress. Julian was reviewing the acquisition of a major banking conglomerate, a new resource to fund their shadow governance. Seraphina was reading an ancient text, a scholar once more but now one who commanded the forbidden knowledge. Seraphina set the book down and walked to Julian, placing a hand on his cheek. Her touch was warm, and the crimson in her eyes was soft, directed only at him. "You have given me the world, Julian. Freedom from the silver, dominion over my own kind, and power beyond the old rules," she said, her voice rich with satisfaction. Julian met her gaze, his own ambition shining back at her. "And you have given me truth, Seraphina. The true world, the true power, and a bond that is absolute." He looked at her throat, bare and beautiful, free of the silver shackle. "The chain is gone," Julian murmured. "But I think, my queen, that I like the feeling of the bond more." Seraphina smiled, a slow, deep, powerful expression of triumph. "Then wear it, my anchor," she commanded, not with force but with the power of shared will. She raised her hand and, with a silent flash of her power, materialized a single simple torque of blackened iron around Julian's throat. It was not a shackle, it was a symbol, an ancient metal of disruption, now neutralized and transformed by her will into a mark of sovereignty. "The iron of the anchor," Seraphina announced, her voice a silent vow. "A reminder that while I am unbound, my control, my absolute bond, belongs to the mortal who taught me the true meaning of power." Julian Vane, CO and now sovereign partner to an unbound queen of night, touched the cold, dark metal. It was the weight of an empire, and he wore it with the ruthless pride of a man who had won the ultimate gamble. They were the new center of the world. The era of the chain was over. The era of the absolute bond had just begun.